signal to Ramanan for Ramanan to start.
Yeah.
So live on the. We are live.
Maybe 45 more seconds.
Ramanan, wait for 5-10 seconds and then start.
Yeah, I start.
Go ahead.
Hi. Goodbye, start. Good evening, good day, everyone. Welcome to the 51st lecture of Ekamra Science Forum. The word amateur comes from a French word meaning lover of. An amateur is someone who does something because they enjoy doing it and don't do it for money. Ekamra Science Forum was started by a group of amateurs with the intention of taking science, engineering, and technology to the common person in a language that is understandable to all. The stress is more on making the audience understand the topic and make them feel comfortable. We believe this works well when people tell a good story. We welcome people from all walks of life who can tell a good story. And we have had professionals, amateurs, and even school kids talking to us all. The last of which we want to make an annual event once the pandemic settles down and allows some form of normalcy. So this is our story, and we started in August 2017 and are in our 5th year of existence. Not bad for a set of people who want to talk, listen to science. Our sessions have all been online since April 2020. All our lectures are recorded and available on YouTube, and we have 1.4K subscribers. We have a WhatsApp group where we also talk science. We also run classes on topics related to maths. If you want to be a member or need more details, please reach out to us on Facebook, and we promise a fast response. So here we are on our 51st lecture and 5th in our 5th year, Understanding the Mind of G.H. Hardy, to be delivered by Professor Krishnaswami Alladi. G.H. Hardy of Cambridge University, well known as Srinivasa Ramanujan's mentor, was one of the most accomplished mathematicians of the 20th century. He had several idiosyncrasies and thus was a very colorful and eccentric individual. He had firm opinions on men and matters and did not hesitate to express them. Therefore, he makes a very interesting character study. In the course of giving an account of Hardy's remarkable life and some aspects of his profound research in a non-technical manner, the speaker shall describe and analyze some of his traits and habits, which also shed light on Hardy's working style and actions. In particular, the speaker will discuss the interactions between Hardy and two of his most famous research collaborators, a distinguished colleague, J.E. Littlewood, and the Indian genius, Srinivasa Ramanujan. Which brings us to the speaker of the day. Professor Krishnaswami was born and raised in Chennai. He gave a VSF lecture in 2017 on the physics lectures in Madras, including in his ancestral house, Ekamra Nivas, and the story of the founding of the Institute of Mathematical Sciences. He specializes in number theory and works as a professor of mathematics at the University of Florida and was chair of the mathematics department there from 1998 to 2008. He is also the editor-in-chief of the Ramanujan Journal, which he founded in 1997. So without much ado, over to you, sir.
Oh, am I to start now?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Well, first of all, Merry Christmas to all viewers of this lecture. This is the first time I'm giving an actual lecture on Christmas Day, although I do work on my research and so on. So it's an interesting experience. My thanks to the Varahamihara group for inviting me to give this talk and in December, which is Ramanujan's birth month. My thanks especially to Gopu for the invitation, and also now to both Ramanan and Badri for all the technical assistance relating to this lecture. I'm really impressed that in 5 years, so many wonderful lectures have been conducted by the Varahamihara group. As was pointed out, I gave the talk during the very first year of the founding of this wonderful group, and I'm very glad to be back here to give this talk. In Madras, I have given a talk once on understanding the mind of Srinivasa Ramanujan, and that was, of course, during the month of December. And for those of you who are in the audience in YouTube who attended that talk, this would be a very nice supplement, but you can understand this talk without having had, without having attended the talk on Ramanujan. So I'm going to make it self-contained. And as Ramanan said in the introduction, the whole purpose of this Varahamihara group is to reach out to a wide audience and educate them about the great happenings in science. And therefore, I'm going to keep this talk non-technical, but of course, since Hardy is a mathematician, there will be plenty of references to mathematics, but I'm not going to get technical. So there will be a lot of stories, which I hope will be inspirational to anybody who listens to them. So first of all, let me begin by asking, who was G.H. Hardy? He was one of the greatest mathematicians of the 20th century. Definitely very influential. It's no exaggeration to say that he and his colleague, Cambridge colleague J.E. Littlewood, led the revival of British mathematics in the 20th century, British mathematics which had taken somewhat of a back seat in the post-Newtonian era when great strides were being made in mainland Europe, especially France and Germany. Hardy's area of research was analysis and number theory. And since Ramanujan's work mostly was in the domains of analysis and number theory, it was natural for Ramanujan to approach Hardy in terms of trying to get an assessment of his results. And that is how Hardy and Ramanujan came into contact, and Hardy became Ramanujan's mentor. Hardy had two great collaborations, one with Ramanujan and another with Littlewood. And the Hardy-Littlewood collaboration is actually considered to be the greatest mathematical partnership in history. So I'm going to give more details about the Hardy-Littlewood collaboration later on and how their personalities were different, but at the same time they collaborated so well. But now, before I get to the mind of Hardy, I would like to just give some biographical highlights of G.H. Hardy so that we know something about his life, and against that background, we can understand many of the characteristics of him as a man and a mathematician. Hardy was born on 7th February, 1877, so about 10 years before Ramanujan. He was born in Cranleigh in Surrey in England. He was the elder of two children. He had a younger sister by name Gertrude. Hardy's father was a school teacher, and his mother a senior mistress in a training college. And as young children, the parents told Hardy and the sister to read good literature and encourage them to discover things for themselves. It's not saying that you should do math, but whatever they want to think about, they encourage the children to discover things for themselves. Hardy, of course, showed a great precocity for mathematics. And on the recreational side, he loved cricket. And I'm going to talk about Hardy's passion for cricket later on. And especially the Indian audience will appreciate some of the things I'm going to tell about cricket. He was frail in physique. And even though he was quite talented as a cricket player, he was not chosen for the team because of his frail physique. So that was a big disappointment for him, that he could not play on the team. And therefore, he loved to defeat his classmates in mathematics, in which he excelled. So that gave him a sense of accomplishment and pleasure in defeating his classmates in mathematics. He secured admission with scholarship in Winchester College, which is actually one of the finest in England. But he was not very satisfied with the way things were being taught there. And so he actually moved to Trinity College in Cambridge, which of course could also be described as a mecca for mathematics. Some of the finest mathematicians were fellows of Trinity. In Cambridge, he had to take the tripos exam. It's a very difficult exam, and he hated the tripos. Nevertheless, he did extremely well in the tripos and was soon after made fellow of Trinity College. But I should say here that when I say he hated the tripos, because it involved mastering a lot of mathematical tricks, and he didn't like that kind of approach to mathematics. So the person who actually opened his eyes, to use Hardy's own phrase, was Professor Augustus Loewe, who taught him some analysis, and in particular asked him to read a treatise, a book of Camille Jordan. And Hardy says, my eyes were opened up by Professor Loewe, who taught me a few terms and gave me the first serious conception of analysis. I shall never forget the astonishment with which I read the remarkable work of Jordan. So for all of these great people, there is some particular book, paper, whatever, that actually opens their eyes and then makes them pursue that field. So this was Hardy's inspiration, was this book of Jordan, just as Ramanujan was initially influenced by Cart's synopsis. He was made fellow of Trinity College in 1901. And when he received Ramanujan's letter from India, full of incredible formulae, as we all know, his first reaction was that this probably was written by a crank. But then on looking, he and Littlewood looked into the formulae a bit more closely. They realized that it's very unlikely that someone can write such outrageous formulae, some of which could neither be proved nor disproved, because if something is blatantly wrong, a mathematician of the caliber of Hardy could easily disprove them. So both Hardy and Littlewood at that time came to the conclusion that Ramanujan was a genius. In fact, they compared him to a genius in the magnitude of Euler and Jacobi, and of course invited him to Cambridge. And of course, the rest is history, not just for Ramanujan, but history of mathematics, the Hardy-Ramanujan collaboration and what happened to Ramanujan in Cambridge. So I'll talk later about certain aspects of the Hardy-Ramanujan collaboration. So I just want to mention some of the honors that Hardy received in his life. The 1920s were the years when Hardy received many honors. He was awarded the Royal Medal of the Royal Society in 1920. He served as secretary of the London Mathematical Society from 1917 to 26. And by the way, never missed a single meeting of the society. He was president of the society from 1926 to 28 and received the London Mathematical Society's highest honor, namely the De Morgan Medal in 1929. In 1926, Hardy founded the Journal of the London Mathematical Society and subsequently the new series of the Oxford Quarterly Journal. Ironically, Hardy died on 1st December 1947, the very day he was supposed to be presented the Copley Medal of the Royal Society. So this just sums up the life of G.H. Hardy. Now, let me move to the main aspect of today's talk. Why is Hardy such an interesting character study? All brilliant minds have their idiosyncrasies. But Hardy was exceptional, even among such brilliant people. There are so many peculiar aspects of his behavior, of his likes and dislikes, that one wonders how his brain or his mind would have worked. People always talk about how Ramanujan's mind worked, and of course, that's a natural question to ask, since he startles everybody with not only with the quality of his discoveries, but the manner in which he made the discoveries. But I think it's also just about it as interesting to understand Hardy as a person, as a human being. So let me give a couple of examples. Start with a few examples. He was quite introverted and very shy. He hated pictures of him being taken, even though he was described by most of his contemporaries as actually being quite good looking, handsome. He would not even tolerate seeing an image of him, whether it was in a photo or in a mirror. So if he went to a hotel room, he would immediately take the bed sheets and cover the mirrors so that he wouldn't have to look at himself through the mirror. So this was really, he really hated seeing any pictures of himself. He would also shave without using the mirror, by just feeling his cheeks. So this hatred of seeing himself was, to such an extent that even shaving on a daily basis, he would do by only feeling his cheeks, not even using a mirror. The other thing I wanted to say is he hated publicity, not just seeing himself in the mirror. As a schoolboy, he hated going up the stage to receive a prize because he hated being in the public eye. But he was so good in mathematics, he always won the first prize in his school in every competition. So what did he attempt to do? To avoid being selected for the prize, he would deliberately turn in one or two incorrect answers or solutions in his papers. Really. But nevertheless, he was chosen for the first prize because the solutions, the correct solutions that he turned in were so much superior to anything that any of his classmates gave. So he was always getting these prizes and forced to go up the stage to receive them, which I think is quite interesting that he deliberately tried not to get the prize. Now, from the Indian point of view, especially in relation to Ramanujan, I should say, Hardy was actually a sworn atheist. So he had a viewpoint. Either God did not exist, or if God did exist, then God is his personal enemy. And many of his actions reflected this. So let us first look at the statement of the non-existence of God as an atheist. Because of that, naturally, he did not subscribe to this legend of the goddess of Namakal coming in Ramanujan's dreams and giving him the formula. So he said this is something that the Indians believe, but he never really subscribed to this story. In fact, he even went to the extent of saying Hinduism is a religion more of observance. People do things without actually believing in them. And Ramanujan might have said things about goddess of Namakal and belief because he didn't want to offend his family members or offend people around him who are very devout Hindus. This was his interpretation. because he said when Ramanujan made the statement, all religions are more or less equal, he said if Ramanujan were a devout Hindu, he would have said Hinduism is a better religion than others, but he said all religions are more or less the same, and therefore he concluded that Ramanujan was not probably deeply religious and may not therefore have, this was his interpretation, but it may not actually be correct because Hinduism, as we know, is a very tolerant religion, and we are taught from childhood that all religions are more or less the same, and that we happen to be born Hindu, and therefore we should do the practices of Hinduism. Anyway, but this is a matter that not all people may agree with, but nevertheless, this was Hardy's view of Ramanujan's faith in God and faith in Hinduism. Now, let us look at the second aspect. Assuming God exists, God is a personal enemy. So what he would do is, every time he walked out of his rooms, of course, on a rainy day, you carry an umbrella, but even on a clear day, he would carry an umbrella with him. Why? So his argument was that since God didn't like him, if he didn't carry an umbrella on a clear day, God would make it rain so that he would get wet. So this is sort of a game he's playing with God. So he carries this umbrella, so God would not make it rain, because if it did rain, he has an umbrella with him. And therefore, this is one way of ensuring that a clear day remains clear. This is just, of course, something very simple, but I'm going to later give you a more interesting example of how he viewed God as an enemy and how he took a step to, this is going to be a mathematical story relating to the Riemann hypothesis, and how he took a step to counter a possible action by God. Now, Hardy, as I said, was passionate about cricket. But before I get to the cricket story, I have to tell you one more thing. He was constantly evaluating, measuring, estimating every person he met. So this was his nature. He comes into contact with someone, and then he immediately tries to measure and estimate how brilliant is this person, how valuable is this person's work, how usefully is this person spending his life. I mean, one may ask, is this really necessary to go on estimating people? But Hardy was doing that constantly. He estimated himself to be the 5th best mathematician in the world at his time. So that shows both his arrogance and his modesty. He didn't give himself #1 ranking, but he gave himself a sufficiently high ranking. So he was modest and at the same time arrogant. He considered himself to be the 5th best mathematician in the world. There is a very famous estimation by Hardy of mathematicians on the basis of pure talent. And this was told to us by the great Paul Erdős, on whom I have lectured in Madras, in fact, once to the Varaha Mehra Foundation. So on the basis of pure talent, Hardy gave Ramanujan the perfect score of 100. He gave Hilbert, the great German mathematician, a score of 80. This is on the basis purely of talent. We're not talking about total contribution or work. He gave his colleague Littlewood 30 on the scale, and he gave himself 25. So there, clearly you can see his modesty, that he gave himself only 25 compared to Ramanujan's 100. But also, he rated Littlewood as being the more talented of the two between himself and Hardy. So this is a very well-known ranking of Hardy in mathematical circles. Now, Hardy, of course, was passionately interested in mathematics. He was a confirmed bachelor. He had no distractions, no social distractions. So he did mathematics all the time. And that's one reason why he was also so productive. But he also viewed non-mathematicians with some contempt, because he felt mathematics was the highest among the intellectual pursuits. Anybody not doing mathematics was not up to his standard. He viewed mathematics as the most hallowed among the pursuits. Now, he of course had recreation. He was very good in tennis. And as I said, he was passionately interested in cricket. So he would spend every afternoon relaxing by either playing tennis or watching cricket in Cambridge. Now, if you are a non-mathematician, but you knew something about cricket, that you could hold a conversation with him about cricket, then he would have respect for you. Because Hardy's interest was so much in cricket that he analyzed the tactics of the game, he rated the champions, he had the scores of many of the important cricket matches by heart, and therefore, if somebody was willing to talk to him about cricket, he would spend a good amount of time talking to him, and he would actually have respect for that individual. So even if you're not a mathematician, you can still talk to Hardy if you knew some cricket. So for example, he would ask questions like, what do you think this captain should have done in such and such a match? Who do you think should have been the opening batsman instead of so-and-so? Would the match have changed? So on and so forth. So this was Hardy's personality. And at that time, of course, the greatest batsman was Jack Hobbs. And by the way, even today, I think Hobbs holds the record for the highest number of runs in first-class cricket. I may be wrong. I've not watched or kept track of cricket as much after I've come to the United States, but I think Hobbs still holds this record for the total number of runs in first-class cricket. So the Hobbs class is the highest. So he would even talk about a mathematician being in the Hobbs class. Later in life, when Bradman came over to England and scored this century before lunch, double century before tea, and triple century before the end of the day's play, and broke all these records, he introduced a new class called the Bradman class. And of course, that also influenced his rating of mathematics. So this is just to tell you how passionately interested he was in cricket. Now, he held firm opinions on mathematics and on many things. He had contempt for people who did not do creative work, because he felt, and he expressed this, that work which is not creative is actually dull. So here is a quote from Hardy. Most people can do nothing at all well. It is a tiny minority who can do anything really well. And the number of men who can do two things well is negligible. So a person with this attitude about you are worth it only if you do something creative was naturally drawn by the very creative mathematics of Ramanujan. And Ramanujan really blew his mind out by just the originality of his results and the starting nature of his discoveries. So no wonder Hardy was so much impressed by Ramanujan. Here are a couple of other quotes of Hardy. Poetry is more valuable than cricket. But Bradman would be a fool if he sacrificed cricket to write second-rate poetry. So he did say the mind is superior to anything being done physically. What you achieve using your mind is superior to anything you do physically. So poetry is written by deep contemplation is a superior accomplishment than scoring a century in cricket, according to Hardy. But nevertheless, whatever you do, you must do extremely well. So that's why he says Bradman would be a fool if he had to write poetry, which was second-rate, when he was so talented in cricket. So that's where he should Zell. Choose a career which you do really well and make a significant contribution. Of course, this applies more generally. This is not just to Hardy. This applies to many people who have made solid contributions in a variety of fields. It could be in literature, it could be in science, it could be in even politics, whatever. Whatever you choose, be passionate about it and make a solid contribution. He was one of the most thorough lecturers. People who have attended Hardy's lectures have all expressed the thoroughness, not only of the preparation, but of the delivery. The great mathematician Norbert Wiener, who invented the field of cybernetics, said, "In all my years of listening to lectures in mathematics, I've never heard the equal of Hardy for clarity, for intellect, or for intellectual power." Norbert Wiener said after attending Hardy's lectures. Another aspect of Hardy, which is mentioned quite often in mathematical circles, is Hardy felt that mathematics was a he said, young man's game. Nowadays, we should say young person's game. The comment is that the most original work is done when you are very young. It is not to say that you are not going to be doing significant work in later years, but the most original contributions come from very young minds. So even talking about Ramanujan, Hardy said that Ramanujan's death at the age of 32 was not the real tragedy. Because if he had lived longer, he would definitely have done more mathematics. But it may not have been mathematics of a higher level, of greater originality. This was Hardy's view. And he compared this with some other great mathematicians who have died very young, like Abel died in his late teens. Galois died in his late teens. Abel died, I think, when he was like 21. Ramanujan at 32 and Riemann at 40. And he said all of these people had finished their greatest discoveries by then. Even the greatest mathematician in history, Carl Friedrich Gauss, is supposed to have made all his great discoveries in his teens and spent his later years polishing up his work for presentation. This is what is said of Gauss. But people who have studied Ramanujan's mathematics very closely, people like George Andrews and others, feel that perhaps in this one state estimation, Hardy may have been wrong about Ramanujan, because the Mach theta functions that Ramanujan discovered from his deathbed actually were among the deepest of his contributions. So maybe he was still on the rise, and maybe he had not yet peaked. So one would never know this. But it's not entirely clear that what Hardy said about Ramanujan was actually correct. In any case, this view that the greatest original work is done in youth, he put that view on himself, because he said the best contribution for a mathematician past the age of 40 is to use his experience and write books. And Hardy wrote a number of very influential books in his later years. He was a prolific writer, very meticulous, and one of the finest in exposition, and he wrote really influential books. His last book was a book on divergent series, and the book had been sent, it was Hardy's favorite topic, and the book had been sent to press, but Hardy did not live to see the book in print. So Littlewood, his close colleague, who wrote a preface to this book, says, how much a man, I'm quoting Littlewood, how much a man wants to continue in a certain line of work when he is past his prime is a matter of temperament. So Littlewood continued to do research well into his old age. Various others have also made great contributions in later years. But Hardy decided that after the age of 40, his time is best spent in writing books. So that was his firm view. Even talking about tennis, one of my favorite sports. I talked about cricket, but let me talk about tennis. Bjorn Borg, whom all of us Indians admire, having won 5 straight Wimbledon championships, retired at his peak after John McEnroe beat him back-to-back in Wimbledon and the US Open in 1981. He called it a day. He said there's no point playing more professional tennis. He retired. On the other hand, an equally great tennis player, Jimmy Connors, he continued to play till he ran out of energy. So he continued to play into his 30s. He may not have won Grand Slam championship, but he did win even in later years, but he may not have won those championships in his mid-30s, but nevertheless, he played simply because he loved the sport. He said, I don't know anything else to do. So this is a matter of temperament, what people do. So I'm just giving this example from sports. Now, let me say something about collaboration now, because I need to talk about Hardy Ramanujan and Hardy Littlewood. The Hardy Ramanujan collaboration was actually one of the most romantic episodes in mathematics. The way it happened, we'll come to the partitions in a moment. The Hardy Littlewood collaboration was a systematic collaboration where the two would work on a class of problems and wrote a series of papers, such and such, some problems in Partitio Numerorum 1, some problems in Partitio Numerorum 2, like that. You know, they wrote a series of papers. It is considered to be the greatest partnership in history. So I'm now going to read for you the rules of their partnership. Okay, the Hardy-Ramanujan partnership. There are 4 rules. When one wrote to the other, it should not matter whether what was written was right or wrong. So 2 of you are collaborating. So one of you says, okay, maybe this can be done. It shouldn't matter whether it's right or wrong. That's rule number 1. Rule number 2, when one received a letter from the other, he was under no obligation whatsoever to read it, let alone answer it. So this is part of the rules for collaboration. Number 3, although it did not matter if they both thought about the same detail, still it was preferable that they should not do so. Number 4, it did not matter at all if one of them had not contributed the least bit to the contents of the paper under their common name. I want to elaborate on this last one a little bit more later. So these are the 4 rules of their collaboration. The great mathematician Harold Bohr, the brother of Nobel laureate Niels Bohr, as he is known to the general public, if they at all know Harold Bohr, they always refer to him as the brother of Niels Bohr, but he was a great mathematician. He made the following statement: seldom or never was such an important and harmonious collaboration founded on such apparently negative axioms. So these 4 axioms, if you read them, you'll get to feel, how is this even going to get a collaboration going? So that's what Harold Bohr says. These apparently negative axioms were the key for their most harmonious and important collaboration. So this is very important, but it's a fantastic collaboration of Hardy and Littlewood. Now, since I brought Harold Bohr into the picture, I should tell you a story connected with Bohr and Hardy, but that involves the Riemann hypothesis. So this also involves this thing about God being an enemy. So Hardy was about to board a boat to take him from England to Denmark, where he was supposed to give a lecture at the invitation of Harald Bohr. The North Sea on that day was very rough, and therefore some people feared maybe this boat might capsize. So Hardy had to make sure that God will not make the boat capsize. So what did he do? Before boarding the boat, he sent a telegram saying that he had proved the Riemann hypothesis, which even today is unsolved and is considered to be the greatest unsolved problem in mathematics. So he sends this telegram saying he has solved the Riemann hypothesis. And his argument is as follows. If my boat capsizes, he is, of course, a very well-known and highly regarded mathematician. So he's not going to make a false claim that the Riemann hypothesis has been proved, right? I mean, a lot of mathematicians who claim Riemann hypothesis is proved, and there is a little mistake somewhere. Hardy was held in such high esteem that, let us say, if the boat capsizes, the telegram is received. They would have said, oh my God, what a sad thing. Hardy didn't even appear here to give his lecture on the proof of the Riemann hypothesis. He died, and therefore he'll have the reputation that he solved the Riemann hypothesis. And he said, God would not want me to have this reputation of having solved the Riemann hypothesis, and therefore he would make sure the boat does not capsize, and therefore I will reach the other shore safely. So this is a statement about God, about Hardy holding God as a personal enemy and what kind of steps he took. And of course, he did reach the other shore safely. And then when people asked, have you proved the Riemann hypothesis? He said, no, I mean, this was just a telegram I sent to ensure my safety on this perilous journey. Now, with regard to proof, I have to say a few things about proof. Hardy, of course, emphasized the rigor and accuracy of proofs to a great extent, and tried to impress Ramanujan about the importance of proofs. But he was never harsh on Ramanujan. So this movie, The Man Who Knew Infinity, which I think is a wonderful movie. I've written a long review about this movie. And I feel there is never a dull moment in this movie. But nevertheless, there are some things which are highly exaggerated in this movie. And one of the things that's exaggerated is you see Hardy being somewhat harsh on Ramanujan with regard to proof, and even saying, I don't want to listen to you. Go until you have a proof. I don't want to see you. He was never that harsh on Ramanujan. In fact, he worked with Ramanujan to make certain things rigorous because he understood the importance of Ramanujan's mathematics. And of course, out of contact with Hardy, Ramanujan did begin to understand and appreciate the methodology of proof, although he was always in a different level, and therefore very often he would make statements without really fully proving them rigorously. So let me talk a little bit about the Hardy-Ramanujan collaboration. In terms of collaboration, there is, in mathematics, a golden rule that if there are people who write joint papers, the names always appear in alphabetical order. This is very different from physics and chemistry and other disciplines, where you have a first author and then a number of people who have assisted in the research who are lower down on the list. In mathematics, it's not like that. If 3 people write a paper, the names are listed in alphabetical order according to the last name. So it is Hardy and Ramanujan. Hardy, H comes before R. It's Hardy and Littlewood. However, as Hardy himself said, in a collaboration, all collaborators are equal, regardless of whether one has contributed very little, or in Hardy's opinion, nothing at all. Once they decide to write a joint paper, as far as the world is concerned, everybody is equal. Not only that, you should never talk about who did what in a collaboration. Sometimes you could say, in praise of your collaborator, you could say, when you give a lecture, I could not have done this without so-and-so's input on such and such a thing, right? But other than that, you never really talk about who did what in the collaboration. So this was Hardy's dictum, and he followed this to the letter. Why do I emphasize this? I emphasize this because the greatest contribution of Hardy, and he himself said, was the discovery of Ramanujan. And one of Ramanujan's greatest works was this joint paper he wrote with Hardy on the asymptotic evaluation of the partition function, the famous Hardy-Ramanujan formula. And one always asks, how did this paper come about? So after Ramanujan died, when the collected works of Ramanujan was published, Littlewood was asked to write a review of the collected works of Ramanujan. And naturally, in that review, talking about many of Ramanujan's papers, Littlewood wanted to talk about this particular paper of Hardy and Ramanujan on the number of partitions of an integer. So in writing the review, Littlewood wanted to say something about their collaboration. Who did what? But he had to get Hardy's permission. So I'm now going to, and Hardy agreed. And so you find, if at all, a statement on who did what in that paper, it is found in Littlewood's review. So I'm now going to show you a page using camera. So this is a page from this book called Littlewood's Miscellany. I hope you can see this clearly. So Gopu, just say yes or show a thumbs up if you can see. Oh, Badri has already shown a thumbs up. Okay, very good. So one of the things you see here is the value for the number of partitions of the number 200. So a partition of a number is a way of writing that number as a sum of other positive integers, including itself, of course. So, for example, there are 5 partitions of the number 4. 4, 3 plus 1, 2 plus 2, 2 plus 1 plus 1, and a sum of 4 ones. So it looks simple in the beginning, but partitions grow very rapidly. So the number of partitions of the number 200 is about 3 trillion. This is the exact number of values of this is the exact value of P of 200. So the important question was, can we write down a formula for the number of partitions of n? And that was accomplished by Hardy and Littlewood in their famous paper, where they initiated what is called the circle method. This is the formula of Hardy and Ramanujan. I'm not going to go into the technical details, but in this formula, what they're basically saying is you represent this is a series involving continuous functions, but you have to chop the series at a position which is new about the order of magnitude of the square root of the number. And what you get will be the nearest integer to this expression will be the number of partitions of 200, of n. And what Hardy and what they did was this particular series was used to test the correctness of the formula by choosing 200, and it did give this value. Now, one thing about these functions, for whatever reason, which can only be understood by studying it more deeply using the theory of modular forms, the number n minus 1 over 24 comes into the picture. I can't explain it in this non-technical lecture, but this number comes into the picture. So the point here is this. You take the first term of this series, and that is what is called asymptotically equal to P of n. Asymptotically means ratio is 1. So the error term is relatively small in comparison to the first term. You take 2 terms of the series, the third term, the error term is much smaller compared to the size of the first 2 terms, and so on. But this is quite rapidly converging to the value of P of n. If you only want to look at the first term of the series, this 1 minus 1 over 24 has really no significant role to play. You can do it by just looking at n. It was Ramanujan's genius that this number minus 1 over 24 has to be brought into the picture. And that actually is giving you the key to the theory of modular forms playing a role in this particular game. It was also due to Ramanujan that the specific shape of this psi cube, which he conjectured, comes into play. But as Littlewood said, without Ramanujan's insight, this formula would not have come into place at all. But then, to establish this formula, to determine this value nu, which is of the order of magnitude square root of n, to estimate the error, to show this is the nearest integer, required the technical mastery of G.H. Hardy in complex variable theory. But Hardy could not have arrived at this formula without Ramanujan's insight. So you really have to appreciate the fact that both of them were involved in this. And it was truly a brilliant combination that led to this particular collaboration. Now I'm going to quote Littlewood from this review. We owe the theorem to a singularly happy collaboration of two men of quite unlike gifts, in which each contributed the best, most characteristic, and most fortunate work that was in him. Ramanujan's genius had one great opportunity worthy of it. So this was what Littlewood said. So he said, both of them deserve credit for whatever they contributed towards the solution of this problem. And indeed, any stage production on Ramanujan that you see, whether it is a play, whether it is an opera, whether it is a movie, they all focus on this aspect of Ramanujan's work because of the brilliance of this collaboration and also the fact that you can explain to the lay public what a partition is. Before I conclude, I have to also mention a couple of other things, non-mathematical, to give a complete picture of Hardy as an individual. There are questions asked, and I'll be very brief about this. Was Hardy a homosexual? Was he gay? He was a member of a society called the Apostles, which was an intellectual society in Cambridge, which consisted, I won't use the word mostly, but a good number of gay individuals. Not all apostles were homosexual, yet a homosexual current ran through the society, which intensified during the years when Hardy was a member. But there are no records of Hardy having a boyfriend. In fact, Littlewood says Hardy was a non-practicing homosexual. What does that mean? Non-practicing. He never had a boyfriend. He had no female friends, and all his friends were male. But he never really had any relationship, closer relationship with them. This statement that he made, that Ramanujan was the one romantic incident in his life, should be viewed in terms of mathematical romance. After all, people who do mathematics, like people who do poetry, it is flights of imagination. There is a romance in doing great work in mathematics. So it is in that sense he meant that this was this was the single romantic incident of his life. Robert Canigal, in his biographies, in his really outstanding biography of Ramanujan, I think spends about 30 to 40 pages talking about the life of Hardy. And then he does discuss Hardy's homosexuality in good detail, but in the end he concludes that we have no evidence really that he was a homosexual. Let me say something about, I had something else to say about Hardy being homosexual. Yes. I also want to, so I should close with this thing. So I'll say something before I close with that, and I'll talk about Hardy's view about pure and applied mathematics later on. Since I mentioned about Hardy's relationship with Ramanujan, and he referred to it as the one romantic incident, Let me also say something about what he said when he heard the news that Ramanujan had died. And this is, of course, there in the movie, and I made a reference to the movie. He said, I can say to myself when I am depressed, when I'm finding myself forced to listen to pompous and tiresome people, well, I have done something you could never have done. That is to have collaborated with Littlewood and Ramanujan in something like equal terms. Now, with regard to Littlewood, Littlewood himself says in his miscellany that he and Hardy were totally opposites in personality. Littlewood was married, he liked the company of women and many other things, and he says he and Hardy were totally opposite, but they had the most harmonious collaboration. They had the greatest regard for each other as mathematicians. And even in the collaboration, Littlewood would say, whenever they wrote a joint paper, Littlewood would first give a general sketch of the paper, how it should go. Values of constants were immaterial. The fact that there was a constant factor was important. In detail, Hardy would determine these constants. Hardy always wrote the final draft. Hardy always checked the details. And Hardy's draft was something that could not be improved on. So he left to Hardy to finish all that and also to check the details. This is how the Hardy-Ramanujan collaboration, Hardy-Littlewood collaboration came. And I'm quite sure that in the Hardy-Ramanujan collaboration, Hardy wrote the paper. Now, something interesting, since we are having New Year tomorrow, in a week. Here was once Hardy's New Year resolutions. Okay. List of Hardy's New Year resolutions. Number 1, prove the Riemann hypothesis. Number 2, make 211 not out in the 4th innings of the last test match at the Oval. Number 3, find an argument for the non-existence of God which would convince the general public. 4, be the first man to climb Mount Everest. So this was before the days of Edmund Hillary. Number 5, be proclaimed the first president of USSR, Great Britain, and Germany. Number 6, murder Mussolini. So this is Hardy's 6 New Year resolutions. It also gives you an idea of his personality, what he considered very important. So I will now conclude the lecture by stating a few other of his beliefs and finally say something about applied mathematics. Hardy never wore a watch. This is from Littlewood, but was always very punctual. Punctual to a fault. He hated war and was a total pacifist. Littlewood also, of course, loved peace, but he did fight. He didn't go into the front lines, but he helped in the war effort in World War I. Okay, but Hardy never took part in anything relating to war. His views about proof are so well known, but I have to have one quote. Bertrand Russell was one of the closest friends of G.H. Hardy. In fact, there were 2 reasons Hardy left Cambridge and went to Oxford. He felt that he was more highly regarded in Oxford. That's one reason. And secondly, he felt that his close friend Bertrand Russell was not treated properly in Cambridge. And here is what he said to Russell once. If I could prove by logic, by the way, Russell was a great logician. If I could prove by logic that you would die in 5 minutes, I should be sorry that you are going to die. But my sorrow would be very much mitigated by the pleasure in the proof. By the way, this is there in the movie, The Man Who Knew Infinity. This is, you can see this in a conversation with Russell. According to Hardy, a mathematician is like a painter, a maker of patterns. If his patterns are more permanent than others, it is because they are made with ideas. So So since he talked about patterns, the value of ideas, let me conclude by saying something about his views on applied mathematics. Hardy was a pure mathematician. He did not really have much regard for applied mathematics. In fact, he said that real valuable mathematics is often dull. But great mathematics is not useful. The real mathematics may not be useful, but this was his view. Yet, he did something in applied mathematics, and to the rest of the world, he's more famous for that than for all his contributions in pure mathematics. If you Google Hardy, you will see the famous Hardy-Weinberg principle, 1908, in population dynamics, where using that principle, he actually disproved certain viewpoints. So this was independently done by Weinberg, a German obstetrician gynecologist, but it's now called the Hardy-Weinberg principle. So he actually said about his own work in pure mathematics, I have never done anything useful, which means applied, but he did something very useful, namely this Hardy-Weinberg principle. Trivial mathematics is on the whole useful. Very simple, trivial things are useful. And real mathematics on the whole is not. Now, even in the United States, up until maybe somewhat after the World War II, in many mathematics departments, applied mathematics was not so highly regarded because they felt it was taking some simpler aspects of what was done in pure and applying. But now the situation has changed dramatically. The emphasis in most universities and departments, math departments, is on strengthening applied mathematics. You find a lot more jobs in applied mathematics than in pure. Also, we should say that several great advances in mathematics have come from people working in other areas, like physics. For instance, superstring theory, which emanated in physics, has had major impact in mathematics. In fact, this great physicist, I forget the person's name right now, but maybe somebody in the audience listening to my YouTube lecture can remind me, who was a leader in superstrings, got a Fields Medal for it, not yet a Nobel Prize. So there was a lot of very good mathematics that came out of these things in physics. So I think there is much greater appreciation, not only about the value of applied mathematics nowadays, but about the healthy interaction between pure and applied, which was not there during the time of Hardy, and definitely not for Hardy. He was a pure mathematician to the core. So in conclusion, I would say that just as all brilliant minds have their idiosyncrasies, Hardy was a very idiosyncratic individual, but probably somewhat extreme. But I think what makes him particularly interesting is the fact that he expressed opinions freely. And we learn a lot about the way he thought by the way he expressed himself. But none of this takes anything away from the greatness of his contributions as a researcher, as a teacher, and as an expositor, and in particular, as a great mentor for the brilliant Srinivasa Ramanujan. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. That was a brilliant talk, and you provided a comprehensive overview of into the mind of G.H. Hardy. So there are quite a few questions, and let me start with a question of my own. Do you think a character like J.H. Hardy is possible in today's world?
Well, first of all, let me say one thing. In today's world, you cannot express certain things that Hardy expressed, certainly not in the way he expressed. So, even if a Hardy-like individual did exist, that person would be largely silent on a number of issues. So you will not see this kind of personality come out. But I'm quite sure that there are a lot of people who, I wouldn't use the word subscribe to all of Hardy's views, but who do appreciate why he thought of certain things in certain ways. But as I said, we are living in different times and our priorities have changed. What we consider as important now was not considered important in those days, and people those cannot be blamed.
Yes.
It was the way in which it was the outlook of those days, and it was the times in which they lived. So I'm not able to give you a complete answer, but one thing I'm certain is that even if such an individual did exist, that individual would not be able to express these opinions so freely, and may not even express the opinions.
Okay. Let me move on to some questions from speaker. Badri wants to know why Hardy hated the Tripos exam. Is there any specific reason that you can give?
He hated the Tripos exam because it was very, according to him, involved mathematical tricks. You had to learn certain types of methods so that you can evaluate certain integrals. These were tricks rather than deep mathematics. You know to use certain substitutions. You had to use certain specific types of transformations, whatever.
Okay.
So this kind of mechanical way of training someone, he said this is not really a test of originality. So Badri, not only did he dislike the Tripos, he actually worked very hard to eliminate the Tripos.
Okay.
He didn't want Tripos exams.
So that goes against the passion for standardized exams nowadays, right?
Correct.
I think
in fact, somewhere I heard that they're now going to do away with SAT. I'm not sure. Somebody told me that in America. Yeah, these standardized tests where you have to memorize certain things or learn certain types of algorithms and so on. I mean, it's not really anything to do with creativity.
Yes. And I think he would have said the same thing about IIT JEE also. I'm sure he would have said the same.
Sure. Some of these entrance exams, right?
Yeah. So one person by name Vijinger 10, who goes by the handle, wants to know, would you say with Hardy, colonialism was at its best behavior, that is bringing unrecognized talent from an obscure place to the center of attention? That's a question.
Well, of course, Ramanujan is a prime example of someone who was brought out of India and came to Cambridge and was given whatever education Cambridge could give. Now, there are two viewpoints here. Hardy himself said, if you had trained Ramanujan in very formal ways, like the way he was trained, you would have less of a mathematician, right? Less of a Ramanujan and more of a European professor. And the loss would be greater than the gain because there are a lot of European professors. But on the other hand, he also felt that Ramanujan wasted much of his time rediscovering the work of others. And so to Cambridge, he would not have wasted so much time. So this is a point that can be debated. But definitely in those days, many people went overseas for higher education.
Yeah.
Ramanujan's contemporary Mahalanobis was one person who was educated in England and came back and, of course, established the highly successful Indian Statistical Institute. So many things happened. In those days, going to England was the thing. My father went to England for his higher degree and so on. So now, of course, people are coming to the United States. So I don't know whether it's colonialism at its best, but it was one of the benefits of one of the positive things that happened in colonialism was that people went to England to get higher education and then came back to India to benefit the country. So coming back is important. Staying there permanently doesn't benefit India.
Okay. So along the same lines, do you also think whether it would have been possible today to find someone like Ramanujan, an uncut diamond, to use the term, and get him to a position like what Hardy did? Is that possible in today's world?
Okay, so I'm going to give you a partial answer to this question.
Yeah.
Whether such an uncut diamond exists, that I can't say, because a Ramanujan-like phenomenon, some people feel is likely to surface again. But even if somebody faintly resembled Ramanujan, I think there are enough measures that have been taken worldwide to encourage young people. For instance, there are many, many programs nowadays for high school students to get special scholarships and so on to continue their, to encourage them to do research. And definitely at the undergraduate level worldwide, there are several foundations which give money for this. In fact, I think Ken Ono is involved in one of these Ramanujan, I forget the exact name of his program. The program that he's involved in, it is funded by, I think partly funded by the Templeton Foundation. I may not be entirely accurate about this, but it is about identifying people from undeveloped countries, really brilliant young individuals, even at school level, and then giving them scholarship, encouraging them to do research. This is one example, and I'm sure there would be more. So yes, definitely there are things in place nowadays and a greater awareness that you should catch them at a very young age. Oh, by the way, I have to make a defense, or I have to make something about the Shastra Ramanujan Prize, of which I am the chair. We give the prize to individuals not exceeding the age of 32 for two reasons. One, Ramanujan lived for 32 years, and therefore the challenge is, what have you done in that time span? That's number one. Number two, it also is the fact that some of the greatest work is done in youth. And this has actually proved itself, because some Shastra Prize winners have gone on to win the Fields Medal. So, are choosing really the very best at the very young age. So, I think there are many more programs and recognitions available these days for very young people.
So, one of the participants on the YouTube channel wants to know the names of the books that you referred. Can you please tell us the names, sir?
Yes. Okay. So there are, I'll actually show you 3 books. Okay. First, let me show, and then I'll give some other references. So I brought with me A Mathematician's Apology by G.H. Hardy. It's a very nice book to read. Many of his opinions are expressed there. And I also brought with me Littlewood's Miscellany. So this is where I took the art. This is J.E. Littlewood. Oh, I hope I don't lose the camera. Hold on. J.E. Littlewood, Hardy's collaborator. Now, the second edition of my book, Ramanujan's Place in the World of Mathematics, just appeared. Published by
your camera is
I have a separate article. Yeah, I did. Yeah, so there is a separate article in on Hardy and on Littlewood here that you should read. But then I will also say you should read Hardy's 12 lectures on Srinivasa Ramanujan, which is now published by Chelsea. 12 lectures. Actually, he gave 2 lectures in Harvard for the tercentenary of Harvard, and I think he later wrote it down as 12 lectures. It's a classic in exposition. And definitely Robert Canigal's book, The Man Who Knew Infinity. So these are some immediate references, but there are many other references I can give.
So, there was some problem with the camera. So I'm just repeating, sir. Mathematician's Apology by Hardy, Littlewood's Miscellany, Ramanujan's book by you, and Hardy's 12 lectures on Ramanujan, and Robert Canigal's book on Ramanujan. So these are the books that you referred.
These are 5 that immediately come to mind. Yes, correct. This is for the general public. I mean, people who are more interested in mathematics should read other things also.
Okay, so this is for the general public.
Who wish to pursue the mathematics more deeply. I mean, there are the 5 notebooks of Bruce Bunt on Ramanujan. There are the 5 books The Lost Notebook by George Andrews and Bruce Bird. So the other things that you can read if you're more mathematically inclined.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And coming back to the 4 rules of collaboration, in a world where we don't have this kind of a connectivity and we cannot take communication for granted, it seems to work so effectively. Do you want to add more to it?
Well, yeah, you may probably modify it to suit the current internet world or world of internet communication. But I think the key point that what Hardy is trying to say is, if you want to have a really healthy collaboration going with someone,
Yeah.
don't force yourself on that person.
Okay.
You send the person a note, leave it. If that person wants to collaborate, he will respond.
Okay.
If that doesn't respond, doesn't matter. You continue with the problem yourself. But don't keep saying, you looked at it, do this, do it. That's what Hardy says should not happen.
Okay. I'm sure there are a lot of management lessons there, and you also mentioned about the negative axioms, the comment by Harold Bohr, right? So I am sure there are a lot of management lessons there, and a lot of the participants in this lecture may want to dig further into this.
See, the same thing in management. I mean, there is this issue. Boss, how much should a boss oversee? Some people say this person is micromanaging too much.
Yeah.
You got to give some freedom to the individual, but at the same time, you still have to oversee.
Yeah.
So this question of what would be the optimum is always there. A good administrator knows what is the optimum amount of oversight.
Okay. And one of the recent questions wants to know, can we say whether Ramanujan contributed more to Hardy's popularity than Hardy's work?
It's a little difficult to say than Hardy's own work, you're saying.
Yeah. Yes, Hardy's work. Yeah.
I think the correct thing to say is, see, there's a difficult question to answer because things have happened in history in a particular form. So let me state a few facts here. Hardy's greatest work is the series of papers, besides this paper with Ramanujan.
Yeah.
It's a series of papers he wrote with J.E. Littlewood.
Okay.
Especially under the title, Some Problems in Partitio Numerorum. Hardy did very fundamental work in number theory. There's no doubt about it. Now, this contribution, Hardy Littlewood, is the generalization of the circle method that Hardy and Ramanujan discovered for the partition.
Okay.
Generalized this and applied it to a whole class of problems in an area called additive number theory, which included problems like the Goldbach conjecture and so on.
Okay.
So, if Hardy and Ramanujan had not discovered the circle method for the partition function, would Hardy and Littlewood have independently arrived at this more general circle method? That's not, you can't answer that question. History, according to history, Hardy and Ramanujan discovered the circle method and applied it to the partition function P of n.
Yeah.
And once they saw that, Hardy and Littlewood said this can be generalized and applied to a whole class of problems, and then they did that systematically.
Yeah.
So Ramanujan definitely played a major role in contributing to a significant rise in Hardy's own research.
Yeah.
But I don't know whether one can say he did more than what Hardy's research is. It's not an easy question to answer, because you have to go through the sequence of events in history to understand how things happen.
Yeah.
But one thing is clear. Ramanujan's contact with Hardy definitely elevated his standing in the mathematical world.
Okay.
Not just because he discovered Ramanujan, but also his own research in many ways enhanced.
Okay. And I understand that Hardy was a very, very thorough, systematic person, and that rigor that he brought to Max also helped Ramanujan a lot, if I can say that. Is that a right statement to say?
Well, it helped it helped put establish Ramanujan's results in a rigorous, right? Rigorously. So Ramanujan learned some aspects of this kind of rigorous mathematics from Hardy, but he was never really, in that sense, formally trained, right? So he never was at the level of Hardy in terms of the rigor. Definitely became more accustomed to these proofs.
Okay. So on a Christmas morning, sir, we don't want to hold on to your time any more, and I think I once again want to reiterate that it has been a brilliant lecture, and it has you have given us a comprehensive overview of G.H. Hardy and answered a lot of questions and given references for further study. So on behalf of Varahamira Science Forum, I would like to thank you and all the viewers on our YouTube channel. Thanks a lot, and Merry Christmas to all of you.